Hi everyone, welcome to Blend's Expert Chats video series. Today I'm going to speak to Darrin Wittwer, our U.S. Head of Sales, about training and compliance, specifically training and compliance localization. Darrin, how are you today?
I'm well. Good to be here, Matt.
Good to have you. For our millions who are watching live as we speak, can you tell us about your localization background and some of your professional experiences that have given you an expertise in training and compliance?
Indeed. I've been in translation, language services, localization, and related industries for about 25 years. And over that time, I've been blessed to work with numerous enterprises, both large and small, across multiple industries related to compliance and regulatory compliance and just general corporate governance as it relates to language services.
So most companies, they maintain either formal or informal standards for employee training, certifications, or compliance. What types of industries may be more stringent or strict in that regard?
Sure. Life sciences, pharmaceutical, bioscience, those by far probably have the most regulatory compliance requirements. However, there are growing areas of compliance such as global tax, global information security, and other areas of that kind that are becoming really high profile and really important. So you're seeing that the requirements and the restrictions, if you will, are growing in those areas too.
And who's deciding whether a business meets those compliance standards? Are there regulatory bodies within those specific industries? Or is there ever a case where the government gets involved?
It's both. There are both industry groups as well as governmental regulatory bodies that function mostly cooperatively to provide guidelines and licensing and other functions like that as far as compliance goes. Some names of organizations that the people on this chat would recognize: FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. GDPR is a really important one that gets a lot of press these days. Also ITAR, which is the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. And then there's HIPAA and POPI, which is Protection of Personal Information Act. But there's a whole variety of different governmental and regulatory bodies and industry groups that function there to support regulatory compliance.
What are the consequences of not being compliant or falling short of those standards? Are there fines to be levied? Are there maybe licensing to be revoked? Or what are companies staring at when they risk not being compliant?
Yeah, what that non-compliance, or why does compliance and regulatory compliance exist? It's really to mitigate risk. So anytime that that's not happening, obviously companies are exposed to personnel issues. Incidents is what they're referred to, where an employee or a partner or someone associated with the business does something out of line ethically or professionally or financially, typically is how it happens. And so you'll have personnel issues that are always problematic. Other than that, you can have real damage to your brand integrity. You can be locked out of markets or, in some cases, industries for non-compliance. Certainly, market restrictions of different varieties that affect the supply chain and then net affect revenue to a particular company or organization. Certainly, fines are applicable in certain instances. And then certainly in the case of the most serious incidents, you will have actual criminal penalties that can be applied. So there's quite a lengthy list of ramifications for non-compliance.
What do businesses do on a personnel level to ensure that their staff are remaining compliant or they're educated about these concepts and practices in the first place?
Yeah, good question. Certainly, most large organizations have some kind of a regulatory compliance function and systems in place to monitor any incidents and to provide training. Oftentimes there's a learning management system that is deployed where regular updates to compliance regulations can be distributed and shared. And so certainly there's an IT function, there's a learning function, and then on top of that, audits and internal checks exist. That might include investigations of certain incidents, but certainly just spot checking to make sure that documents and required documents and filings and things of those nature are done in a timely manner, but also just that the company is and its employees and its partners are operating as they should be. So primarily the audits and checks, and that can be either via IT system of some kind or one-to-one individual.
So when you say learning management system, is that what lay people would otherwise call e-learning? And how might that balance work with, I guess, your traditional in-person instruction versus maybe some COVID warranted remote work shifting that may have accelerated, e-learning content rollouts?
Yeah. LMS is a learning management system. There's a variety of those available commercially. These platforms exist within organizations to deliver training and learning content to employees and partners. And then the completion of that learning or training is closely tracked, and it allows the organization to check a box and report back to whatever government or regulatory agency we were talking about a few minutes ago, report back that that's been done, that their 10,000, 50,000, 150,000 employees have all received appropriate level of regulatory training. Now, how that's done today, blended learning is really the preferred approach, and that incorporates not only instructor-led, but also web-based learning, e-learning, which is often referred to as web-based learning, but also mobile and other options. We're talking about incorporating as many assets types as we can. That could be on-screen text, voice, video, other speech to text, text to speech, mobile modules that can be taken at their own time, and then also incorporating different types of learning, scenario-based gamification, other things of that nature. Anything that will drive engagement and will drive retention. That's really when we talk about delivery of e-learning content via a learning management system, that's what we're referring to as that blended learning kind of holistic approach.
So how does localization and language accessibility come into play with these training requirements or this content delivery in maintaining a compliant operation?
It's really critical. Respect for language and culture, it has to be a core component of any compliance programming. So as I think about it, it's more than just exchanging words or grammar from one language to the next. Organization needs to think about what are the learning objectives that you're trying to communicate to your global audience, and then take into account the culture of that audience. What level of this information is it critical that they receive and be tested on or have knowledge checks on? How is it that we most effectively engage with them so that this understanding is achieved in a timely manner, and that they then know that there is a mechanism whereby they can report any compliance incidents and that they're supported. So language is absolutely essential, and particularly for any business that's doing global business. And this relates back to the various areas of compliance and regulatory compliance. It spans really from finance to manufacturing to licensing and to ethics and everything in between. So language is essential. We have to deliver content to people in their native tongue if we want to have that level of engagement and understanding.
So is localization itself, is that part of maintaining compliance, that these materials and this information is actually available with diverse staffs or teams, whether they're domestically based or perhaps even representing a multinational?
It certainly is required. If you think of medical devices, pharmaceuticals, for example, instructions for use and instructions and guidelines for distribution must be translated into the local language of wherever that will be used or deployed. That is a regulatory requirement. There are other areas, for example, in aerospace and defense, for any manufacturer of a weapon or a vehicle or some type of device of that level, those materials and that regulatory guidance and administrative guidance has to be translated as well. So there certainly are very specific instances where language is a basic tenet of the regulation.
If a business recognizes the need for localization, what is most important to them when they're perhaps shopping a vendor that they want to ensure goes smoothly, or that they foresee to have the most pain, I guess, in rolling out like a full suite of language materials?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it comes back to an organization or a business really understanding what the objectives are and planning for that in advance. So determine what the approach is. What requirements do we have from a regulatory perspective? Who is it that needs to receive this information? What is the mechanism of which it will be delivered? And then also, what is the design of which it will be delivered? And really answering those questions up front and early on in the process, then you can determine from there how is it that we want to go about designing this? Is it just a bunch of text documents or PDF documents that need to be delivered? Are we going to deploy a learning management system? Are we not? Or are we going to track the level of compliance? All of these business questions have to be answered up front. And so it really requires a programmatic approach to compliance and then learning, compliance learning. So I would recommend that people take that holistic thought process and look at it and determine from a cultural perspective, from a business requirement perspective, and a technology perspective, what's the most efficient way to get this done. And then you can evaluate partner suppliers with all of these things in mind of who is best suited, who gives us that best option for working as an extension of our organization to deliver this learning in a really compelling, fast, and efficient way.
How would you draw the distinction between localized materials that are geared toward like a consumer, like a prospect audience, that's encouraging someone to buy, versus compliance materials where it's going toward internal personnel where they're expected to buy in, and maybe there's less wiggle room in regards to cultural factors that might communicate a concept, when you have to be very, I guess, instrumented and disciplined about making sure they follow specific guidelines and protocol?
So let me make sure I understand that question clearly before I respond. How would learning content and language learning content be delivered differently to, say, an employee versus a prospect? Is that kind of what you're going for, Matt?
Right. Marketing versus, I guess, training and learning in general,
Yeah.
regardless of language. Yeah.
Yeah, and particularly in the compliance space.
Sure.
Today, in talking about blended learning and all of the different modems and modes and medium that is available to us, it's really important to strike the right tone and voice. So depending on the audience that you're going for and what the learning objectives are, is it to create buzz? Is it to actually check off a box that this compliance component has been delivered and understood by this individual or individuals? So depending on what those learning objectives are, you can make this as creative or as boring as is desired, right? And really that what determines the tone of any e-learning content that's developed is its culture and that target audience and the learning objectives. What is it that we need to accomplish from delivering this course, designing this course, and localizing this course? So there's so many options. The questions that I think, the business questions that have to be asked up front, what is the return on the investment? What are we looking to accomplish? So depending on what that is, if it's marketing or if it's actual compliance learning and a regulatory requirement, what is the return on that investment? What is the action that we're looking to achieve? And then from there, you can be as creative and change the tone as needed for cultures to arrive at that directive.
So speaking of being creative, you alluded earlier to voice and multimedia. I guess when I think of training and compliance, what comes into my mind's eye, are text-based materials, maybe some infographics. But are companies using more creative content delivery systems such as video and multimedia that might encourage a faster adoption and a higher retention of these training concepts?
Absolutely, and you nailed it. The reason why they are incorporating various mediums is because it does dramatically increase retention and understanding, and also create relevance. Voice, video, audio recordings, images, scenarios, real life scenarios, and any way that we as learning developers can incorporate these different assets to have an impact is so any and all of it is on the table. At Blend, we are very unique in that we offer that real end-to-end service, not only on the translation localization side, but full audio and voice production. So we're able to come to an organization and really clearly identify and help them analyze what that market audience is, and then to deploy these different assets and integrate them into a course that can still be short, but very impactful, and can incorporate on-screen text, it can incorporate video and voice, and be correctly enabled for localization and a cultural experience as well. So it incorporates all of them, and the table and the capabilities just continues to expand. And we think about delivering learning content on people's mobile phones. That's a whole other component of design that we need to think about. And localization, because it obviously contracts the space, but you can still incorporate video, audio, voice, and many of those really rich assets in the learning content.
Darrin, any final tips or recommendations for delivering compliance-focused localization?
Yeah, I do have a couple that I've gathered kind of over my time and experience with different organizations, Matt. The one that leaps to mind is work with a partner that is interested in your business success, your organizational success, and helping to understand what the true business issues are. And in the areas of regulatory compliance, the primary critical issue is how do we mitigate risk? What kind of content and information are we creating and localizing and delivering that's going to help us reduce risk, but also increase incident reporting? That's the primary metric that many of these organizations are going for, is the more they know about what their employees and partners are doing in these global markets, and people are feeling comfortable and enabled and empowered to report incidents, the more successful that a company can be in controlling that risk and addressing any underlying problem. So that would be one. Work with a partner that genuinely cares about your understanding your business issues. Next would be consider carefully the target audiences, both from a language and cultural perspective. That just can't be overshadowed enough. That's just so important that we not operate from a U.S.-centric perspective, but a global perspective. And then build early and often with localization in mind. Make sure that assets are created and designed that can be easily localized. And Blend can certainly help evaluate those assets up front and provide guidance as to, this particular concept or this particular scenario is going to fall flat in Japan versus Germany or the UK or maybe someplace in Latin America. And then lastly, I would say take that programmatic point of view. It really requires that level when we're talking about large scale compliance learning that's localized for a variety of audiences. Take that programmatic point of view and make sure that any partner that you bring on has the same and has the capability and the scalability to meet those needs long term, because there's just so many efficiencies that can be gained when someone is truly working as an extension of your business, focusing on solving your business issues. That would be my summary.
Darrin, that's great stuff. If someone has any questions about training, compliance, and how localization factors into all this, how do they reach you?
I'm certainly available on LinkedIn, Darrin F. Wittwer, and my contact information will be attached to this recording.
I'll make sure of that. Darrin, thanks for spending the time. Great stuff. We'll catch you next time.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.